Now, Mark, as we shift gears a little bit, one story that came across the wires, not too long before our show. This was about 2 hours ago. USC and Doug Belk flipped UCF four-star safety Kendarius Reddick. So, Doug Belk getting some work done, and this comes just a few hours after some other recruiting battles, for USC on Monday. But it's a definite sign that the reputation of this defensive coaching staff is not only like it's getting noticed, but more specifically, it continues to get noticed in the Deep South. I mean, and this has been a recurring theme that USC, instead of being gun shy after some of the flips, the decommits from USC, back to Georgia, USC could have gotten gun shy, but no, USC is going back into the belly of the beast, back into the state of Georgia, in this case, back into the state of Florida, and is continuing to recruit very vigorously in SEC country. Also, Cardi Smith, that was on the offensive line, but nevertheless, former Auburn commit. So like USC going into the South, and in this case, on the defensive side of the ball, it is an indication that this new staff has a reputation that's getting noticed, and it's getting noticed, well outside the Western United States. So definitely a feather in Doug Belk's cap as he builds his future USC secondary.
These are some impressive rankings here that I believe this week I'm allowed to recite because Tim's not here. 14th rated safety in the country, 27th rated out of the state of Georgia, according to the 247 rankings. The composite, pretty much in line with the same type ranking, a top 15 safety in the country, in that range, certainly. And again, out of the state of Georgia. It's quite the back and forth that USC is having with SEC schools battling for players out of the Peach State.
And it is reflective of the mentality that USC has here. And let's keep in mind, just as a little bit of perspective, for those who've been, longtime USC fans, those who followed the program for several years, let's remember Clancy Pendergast, Clay Helton's defensive coordinator. First off, he wasn't a very good defensive coordinator. But secondly, Clancy Pendergast didn't recruit. He basically begged off the recruiting trail. And, it's one thing to have a situation such as what you have at Ohio State, right? Because Chip Kelly, he's older and he felt, exhausted by head coaching, just wants to call plays, just wants to scheme it up. Like, you have plenty of heavy hitters in recruiting on that Ohio State staff such that you don't have to have Chip Kelly on the recruiting trail. Like Ryan Day can recruit quarterbacks, and Brian Hartline can recruit wide receivers, and you have people in their various positions on that staff who can bring in the elite skill possession talent, and you can just have Chip Kelly. You can just set him aside and say, "Hey, Chip, you just call our plays, you design our offense, do what you do best." That's one thing. But Clancy Pendergast was not very good as a coordinator in general, and he didn't recruit. So like that was such a nothing burger, a zero value reality for Clay Helton. And then so you look at this now, and it's like manna from heaven, right? It's water in the desert, water in Death Valley on a 120-degree day. This is exactly what USC fans have been longing to get. And the cherry on top of all this is that Dante Williams, he was a good recruiter, but he didn't have the coaching chops to match. But here that not only is a four-star safety coming into the program, but that with Doug Belk and Taylor Mays, don't want to forget good old Taylor, who seems to be one of the rising young stars in the coaching industry, and someone that USC definitely needs to retain in the future and keep within the program. That with Doug Belk and Taylor Mays on hand to coach Kendarius Reddick, you can feel very confident and very comfortable in the quality of player development that you're going to get here. So it's really leagues apart. It's night and day different from what we've had in previous years here at USC. So it's the caliber of player. It's going into SEC country, so from Georgia, but it was a UCF commit. So really there's kind of this is going into Georgia and Florida, really. You could credit this as a pull from both states. And it's a testament to what this new defensive staff is bringing to the table for future recruiting classes.
And fortunately for USC, in regards to the recruiting battles being waged currently and the news that's coming in, this Kendarius Reddick news somewhat tempers and balances out the earlier news from the day concerning Mat 1 Cody Green, of course, out of Mater Dei at 6'6", 285, one of the very best offensive tackles in the country. Mater Dei, we're talking about USC territory, choosing Oregon.
Yeah, so if our friend Tim Prangley was on the show tonight, he would be lamenting how these prospects from Southern California, from Tim's backyard, aren't being retained at the level that they need to be. And I credited Josh Henson with the Cardi Smith flip. That was some really strong, solid work, to get the decommit from Auburn, bring him in the program. But I think that USC fans would readily agree. Like, even those who get on me when I play bad cop to Tim's good cop, I think they'd agree with me. Like, this is precisely the kind of recruitment you need to be winning more often, right? I'm not like the world's greatest recruiting wizard or analyst, but I did see, when this story broke earlier on Monday afternoon, that this was Oregon's second highest rated offensive line commitment under Lanning, and the only one that was ranked higher, Josh Connerly. And USC fans still remember the sting of losing out on that particular recruit. And we've seen how good Connerly has been in Eugene with the Ducks. So, like, this is really the representative recruitment. It's that if you are operating the way you're supposed to be at USC, if you are performing in recruiting at the level you are expected to at USC, this is the kind of recruitment that you win. Maybe not all the time, but more often than not. And USC hasn't yet turned to that corner. And Oregon is entering this year as a top 3, top 4 program, expected to be competing in the college football playoff semifinals. So recruits are saying that, Oregon is closer to a national championship than USC is. And right now, I think that it's hard to fault that observation. So USC is not going to turn this around instantly, but it does underscore the point that USC really does need to change the conversation this year. And, making the playoff at 10-2 would be absolutely wonderful and fantastic. But I think USC fans would agree. And again, even those who hate me for being the bad cop to Tim's good cop, I think most USC fans would agree. If the Trojans are going to begin to change the conversation, if they're going to begin to change the momentum and feel in and around the program, if they're going to begin to alter the narrative and where it lands and how it sticks, USC needs to win at least 9. You have to go at least 9-3. 8-4 is not going to do it for anybody. 7-5, of course, would be a disaster if USC replicates that in a 12-game regular season relative to 2023. USC has to win at least 9. 10-2 would be a tremendous. Sign me up right now for 10-2 if offered that deal. But USC's going to have to win at least 9 to begin to reshift how the program is perceived, to shift how USC is measured up against Oregon. Let's deal with this hypothetical. If USC finishes 9-3 and Oregon finishes 10-2 and makes the playoff, but loses either in the first round or the quarterfinals, like, if that's the 2024 pair of outcomes for the two schools, I think USC would then be in a position to say, hey, Dan Lanning can't coach his way out of a wet paper bag. He had his elite recruiting classes. He had his national championship window closed. And now here we are at USC. We're the program moving up. Oregon fumbled the bag. you could use that term metaphorically if Oregon goes 10-2 this year. USC could really say, hey, we're the program with momentum. The future is ours. The future belongs to us. Oregon had your chance. Now, I'm not predicting that Oregon's going to go 10-2. I do actually think Oregon will go 11-1. Getting Ohio State at home, I think that's a difference maker there. Obviously not sold on Ohio State's quarterback, but that's a separate issue. I'm saying, I'm just laying forth the hypothetical that if USC goes 9-3 and Oregon goes 10-2 and Oregon doesn't at least get to the playoff semifinals, that would change the recruiting dynamic, I would think, for this next cycle and the one after that. So for in December, some guys who maybe were committed to Oregon might reconsider flipping to USC, especially if they have Southern California roots. If that is what the outcomes are in this 2024 season. But the larger point is, it's not going to change instantly. USC has to do things on the field to begin to change the conversation. Like USC can't have another disastrous season. If USC had gone 11-1 or even 10-2 in 2023, I don't think you'd see this imbalance in recruiting between USC and Oregon. I think USC would be retaining guys from SoCal. And, there are some USC critics out there who say, hey, we're not retaining enough California prospects. We don't seem to have really close relationships with the coaches at the Southern California schools. I think there's some truth there, but this is mostly about USC being 7-5 in 2023. I would like to think that is the main driver of this. And then if USC had won 10 or 11 games last year, you would not be seeing Oregon and Dan Lanning continuing to stack recruiting victories over USC. So the Trojans can do something about it. They can't really do anything about it right now in the middle of August, but the next 3.5 months, yes, they will be able to do something about it.
Yeah, when we think about which school attracts players and why they attract players and taking the money portion out of it, that is, of course, more of a factor and technically, for the first time, a factor technically, and go beyond that to what Matt does such a fine job of highlighting most of the time. And we're talking about competent coaching, competent recruiting and pursuit of these recruits, showing and displaying and being able to prove the proof of concept, getting players to the NFL, and of course, winning championships in college. I have to shake my decades of college football viewing and my hierarchy. I have to shake that loose and get with today's 17-year-old, because to me, USC is here and Oregon is here. And that is certainly, that's not reality in today's college football. And I know that. But when I see the Cardinal and the gold versus these crazy whacked out bright neon greens and yellows, there is a discrepancy in regality within the sport, and that certainly still exists, but it just does not exist with the 17 and 18-year-olds.
That is, and I think some of the comments in the chat, and when we've seen these comments in chats really throughout the whole off season, is that these kids they're young enough that they don't remember Pete Carroll. They don't remember the dynasty in the first decade of this century. Well, these players were just too young back then, so there isn't that brand identification that there was with earlier generations of players, a decade ago. So USC has to rebuild that brand, and the 2022 season certainly moved things in the right direction, but then not being able to follow that up with a similar or equivalent season in 2023, that definitely allowed all the negative perceptions, all the less than fully favorable narratives to continue. I just want to emphasize one thing, and this plays into my identity as bad cop, but when USC loses a recruit to Dan Lanning in Oregon, should I just kind of say, well, okay, it happened again. It is what it is. It's reality. I think that there has to be a little bit more dissatisfaction expressed about all this, that it's not the USC standard. Now, where I do kind of have a more measured tone is that, USC can't change this instantly. Like, USC can't transform its NIL reality. It can't transform its identity in terms of how close it is to a national championship in the off season. Like, these are not instant fix type situations. On those points, I'm sympathetic to USC. Like, you just right now, Oregon's in an ascendant cycle and position, and USC is not. But to kind of stress in my writing that this is not the USC standard, I think that's fair. So if I sound a little bit like Adam Lamparello, I mean that this is where Adam and I are a little bit in sync. I think it kind of needs to be said, even repeated, so that we remind ourselves, let's not get too complacent in terms of accepting this as the new normal, or accepting this as kind of like a permanent, pervasive kind of reality. Like, there should be real frustration. I know it's just one recruit, Cody Green, today, but it is part of a larger context. It is part of a larger situation. And I don't think the acceptance of Oregon being ascendant in recruiting should be digested or absorbed quite so easily. So if it seems like, being negative and harsh, well, it is, but there's a purpose there, right? Because I think that USC being better, USC, restoring itself, reviving itself, there should be some discomfort, right? Things should be a little bit unsettled. People should be a little bit on edge. Like, there should be that antsy, cranky, ornery quality that comes from seeing a rival continue to beat you on the recruiting trail more often than not. And we can say this is 2026, but this is the future, and the future is based on what recruits are seeing in the present moment. USC needs to change this present moment. And again, I've clearly said it has to happen on the football field. So, like, it's not as though it starts with Jen Cohen. I mean, she has a role to play for sure. It starts with getting this 2024 season right. I think we can agree on that. But I think that being a little bit negative, like pouring a little bit of extra vinegar into the pot, there's a purpose there. There's a reason for it. Like, it's not gratuitous. That's probably what I'm trying to say here. I want every USC fan, every USC reader to continue to feel a little bit unsettled when each of these things happen, because there shouldn't be a complacency about it. And I know it's a fine line between complacency and yet understanding that you can't change everything right away. Like, complacency and acceptance, the line can be blurred between those two things, but I think they're finely interwoven together. And I definitely don't want to be Clay Helton, waving pom-poms before success, before restored status has been achieved. And that, like, I think Tim is a little bit more of an optimist than I am. But I certainly want the change to happen, but I'm a little bit more doubting Thomas about it. And I think that's good, actually, because this is talking season. We're getting to the end of it. We're about to see teams play on the field. So, like, teams are going to begin to prove whether they are legitimately good or not. But, talking season and these polls, which we talked about earlier, remind us it's just talk, and the games on the field are what matter. And I think there's nothing wrong with being a little bit poking, prodding. Some will call it clickbait. And if you want to say that, that's fair. But I'm stressing here, there's a purpose to it. Like, I don't want anyone to be satisfied by it. And if there's like an NIL collective director or anyone who's involved in an NIL effort at USC, if they see what we write and they perceive a little bit of negativity, good. Like, this is meant to spur you into a greater sense of urgency. I'm not writing directly for an NIL audience, but I'm just saying, like, I'm writing for a larger USC audience with the mindset of, like, I want people to feel that USC is not where it's supposed to be. And if USC is where it's supposed to be, you can bet that I'm going to yell it from the rooftops, and I'm going to celebrate it, and I'm going to be really glad about it. But until then, yeah, I think there should be a little extra vinegar. There should be a little extra dissatisfaction sprinkled into the pot. So what some people might think is a gratuitous piece of negativity, I think it's, jabbing, spurring, making sure people remain uncomfortable until the expected USC standard of excellence is attained.